Only recently have headlines revealed the silent disappearance of Mia the Butter Maiden, the kneeling mascot for Land O'Lakes in her buckskin dress and feathers surrounded by what we can only assume are some of the thousands of lakes in Minnesota. Apparently the disappearance happened as early as February, and some have painted a sad metaphor to the murdered, missing Indigenous women crisis in the country. The idea that an Indigenous woman could vanish without anyone knowing why, knowing where, or even noticing at all. Others are relieved to see yet another stereotypical icon be removed, hoping it is a sign that companies realize they are not doing the Native American minority in this country any justice by perpetuating outdated themes or over-sexualizing women. Yet there is another segment of the population seen on social media verbally attacking Native Americans who share the news, calling them insults, mourning the loss of Mia, and claiming she was some sort of nostalgic significance to them. And of course there are those people who don't care. But let's do some investigating into this topic and why the whole thing is problematic. There may be some things about Mia you didn't know, but which could surprise you. Mia first appeared on the Minnesota-based dairy company's packaging in 1928, looking nearly the same as she has in most recent times. What is so significant about 1928? If you remember from our historical era videos, the 1920s were a period between the world wars, just after the Spanish flu hit Indian country and just before the Great Depression and Dust Bowl came sweeping through. It was also in the heart of the residential boarding school period. In fact, 1928 was 11 years before the Western film Stagecoach would be released, a movie credited with sparking the fascination in many ways with what Americans became to perceive as Native American culture, a singular concept involving buckskin, feathers, teepees, mesas, white men in spray tans, and headbands to hold their wigs on as actors, a weird conflation of elements from only a portion of indigenous cultures in the country. But they would come to love the Wild West portrayal, romanticizing the Native American population they had started to feel sorry for just before the Great Depression hit, and made movie-going less of an option. The report we discussed previously is documenting terrible living conditions on the reservations, a report that sparked outrage in white citizens who felt their own government was allowing people to live in squalor. While it may seem impressive that people cared about Native American lives at the time, we also have to remember the time period we just painted. We're caught between feeling bad about Indians and believing their culture and refusal to live like white people is the reason for their failure, and between an era when Indians become the center of entertainment, their old ways people assigned to their deficiencies now being something to celebrate, misuse, and profit from. For during this time, and despite the economic troubles, we start to see tourism increase, museums and art collectors raiding archaeological sites for Indian artifacts, and an overall fascination of Indian cultures, which the public in reality knew very little about. And it was during this time that Mia was born, her proud arms holding a package of fresh butter in a grassy, sunny setting, with deceivingly clean-looking waters and just enough stereotypical elements about her to make her look like a homely, clean, not living in squalor, nature-embedded, wild, and yet tamed Indian. What good timing for the mascot. Well, the Great Depression did little to help companies sell their products, as there was less income to go around. In 1930, butter prices sunk so low that Land O'Lakes bought 7 million pounds of butter to bring the prices back up in just 4 months. In 1937, Land O'Lakes purchased a drying plant to create dried versions of its products. By the time America entered World War II, their products were in high demand, but butter became one of the items on the food rationing list, meaning people, likely the women not overseas in the war effort, had to use ration booklets, as well as money, to purchase restricted food items, using each family member's ration book to come up with the most efficient purchases. This unique system allowed the US and UK to fix prices based on what was available and what they wanted to keep around and give to the troops, and it rationed heavily on butter, eggs, meats, and various high-demand products in an era where it was not common to have a refrigerator or freezer to store foods for long periods of time. By peak wartime, Land O'Lakes purchased many more drying factories, its dry products in high demand. Land O'Lakes had a quota for military troops to produce dried milk. At first it was 22 million pounds in 1941, and it increased to 119 million pounds by 1945. By the time the war ended, Land O'Lakes had 22 different plants producing dried milk and dried eggs, and had grown to the world's largest dry milk product manufacturer. As many Native Americans were impacted by rations as well, and commodities, and others overseas in the war effort, Mia's image still graced the shelves of many pantries, sometimes replaced with the more patriotic imagery of victory butter. I guess Native American images work for nostalgia, but not for inducing American pride and gall. Enter the 50s. Land O'Lakes develops calf milk replacement in a powdered form, and Mia is back to work on even more lines. The company continues to dabble in livestock foods like chicken feed, later branching into Purina as a marketing tool. Although Land O'Lakes' website only mentions the calf milk during this era, it also hires Patrick Deserlet to redesign Mia in the same decade. Well, what's the big deal? Well, Patrick was a member of the Red Lake Band of Chippewa Indians in the north of Minnesota. He graduated high school and left for Arizona State College, now ASU, for art school. He taught art to the internees of the Japanese Japanese and American reservation camp we discussed in Arizona History Part 3. He joined the Navy in San Diego and worked with artist from Walt Disney Studios before returning to Minnesota. When he got the gig to redesign the logo, he thought it was groundbreaking. Native American man was hired to do art for advertising purpose, not common then or even truly to this day. He took it as an opportunity to add floral beaded elements to Mia to make her appear more Ojibwe. In fact, a quick scour through old newspaper ads shows little change to Mia over the years. Perhaps there were less trees and then there were more trees again, the company toying with simplistic ads and then harking back to wilderness imageries as the American attitudes and likes have shifted over the years. But while that should seem significant, the use of Ojibwe culture, the truth is this was the peak of Western film era and stereotypes kept people from noticing. To them, beads are Indian, feathers are Indian, buckskin is Indian, and they're all the same. So while Patrick's efforts were well-intentioned, they likely did little or potentially even backfired on him in the end. In the 60s, Mia stayed and the company ventured into cheese products. They merged with Foco in the 1970s, venturing further into agricultural products. With this merger, we see the other logo associated with Lands O'Lakes for the last near 50 years. Simple, stylized text with the name and no imagery. In 1981, the brand goes international, spreading Mia to parts of the world that likely knew even less about who she's supposed to represent. The 90s see a California merger. The 2000s see an official merger with Purina Mills. In the last decade, more mergers and more partnerships around the world continue to expand the butter empire. But now in the 2020s, just before the big 100-year anniversary of the company, Mia simply vanished. A quick trip to the store will reveal packaging of products that haven't sold as fast, next to ones flying off the shelf, sporting a naked lake and no Mia. Indigenous women are murdered at 10 times the national average rate in the U.S. Homicide is the third leading cause of death for 10 to 24-year-olds and fifth for 25 to 34-year-old women. More than 4 in 5 Native women experience violence in the U.S. More than 1 in 2 experience sexual violence. Native American children have the highest poverty rate and 3 times the rate of PTSD than any other racial category. Native Americans are more likely to be killed by police than any other racial encounter. Why all the somber statistics? Well, it doesn't get talked about, but to some, the removal of Mia is somehow the real national crisis. And isn't that the point? While it may not be quite fair to make the metaphor of Native women vanishing and no one noticing, as with the MMIW topic, it does make one wonder how in 2020 we can still be so embedded in mascots and stereotypes that we still cannot see Native peoples as people. Misunderstood and harassed, Native women are objectified constantly. Just look at the men and the boys who used to fold Mia's knees up on the packaging to create naked breasts. Sure, all fun and games you say, but what if that normalizes the objectifying? What if it subconsciously justifies a terrible act later, or enables a person to see something happen and turn a blind eye? Perhaps the greatest offense here is that during an era of Me Too and women empowerment, Native women are still an afterthought. Where are all the feminists standing up for each other, including Indigenous women? Have we become so complacent with the poor Indian attitudes around since at least the birth of Mia that we carry on the 100-year legacy of accepting the status quo? She may have just been a butter maiden, but her story carries an ugly trajectory of Indian invisibility, unless of course it is a for-profit symbol in the butter empire. But to too many Americans, she is now mourned as a relic of a proud heritage that so many purport that they have as unsubstantiated, just as Elizabeth Warren's. It's a sad day when a mascot change should be a proud moment for a corporation, yet they chose to do it quietly and silently so as not to induce an outrage in their consumers, an outrage that a racially based piece of advertisement was finally deemed troublesome. Well, we hope you learned something today and will butter stick around. As always, be sure to subscribe, provide feedback or requests, and share this channel so we can all be on the same page.